All right, welcome everyone to another class of Security 6000. I hope you're doing well. This week, September 12th, we're going to look at strategy and specifically grand strategy. Now, when we talk about grand strategy, we're looking at how exactly is a country, a state, going to survive in the long term? How is it going to defend its interest? How can it maintain itself and its position in the international system? As you know, the international system is chaotic, it's anarchical, it is survival is not guaranteed. You have to help yourself, and you can't just sit back and think everything's going to be fine. You're going to have to work toward defending your interests, defending your security interests, your economic interests. And grand strategy is all about that. So Hugh Strachan, in his article Strategy and Containment, is all about looking at this exact question of how is, for example, the United States going to survive in the long run? How is it going to survive as a world leader? So, as you know, the United States is in relative decline. We are seeing the absolute rise of China and the resurgence of Russia. And in that regard, we're seeing the world is constructed by multipolarity, right? It's not a unipolar world order. There's one great power. We had that in the 90s. It's gone now. It's gone. So right now we have a multipolar world order where the United States has to compete with Russia and with China. And how exactly is the United States going to do that? What is the United States grand strategy going to be about? That's the essential aspect, the essential question. The United States has made many blunders in the past 30 years, from the 1990s under Clinton with the tragic intervention in Somalia. You had the Kosovo bombing, which almost got us into a war with China when they bombed the embassy there. There's the awful occupation of Afghanistan, which resulted in a strategic withdrawal or retreat, which basically questioned whether or not the United States is a great power at all. We see the humiliation in Iraq and so forth. When Obama did not back up the red line in Syria, all of these question the very position of the United States in the international order. And so that's what the Strachan article is all about. What is grand strategy, and how does that relate to state behavior? So again, how would the United States imagine its position in the next 10 years, right? For example. So a grand strategy essentially is, again, the overall vision of the state's goals in terms of security and how it will go about to achieve these goals or these means. What are the means to security? How is the United States going to navigate its relative decline? Is it going to declare war on China to make sure that it's the top position, or is it going to pull back? Is it going to retrench? Is it going to offshore balance? All of these are very important questions. So there's three basic steps to a grand strategy. One, determining your security goals. What are your security goals? Is it to preserve your position in the international order? Is it to balance against China and against other threats? Is it to neutralize terrorism or organized crime once and for all? And that leads to the second question. What are the main sources of threat? Is it China? Is it Russia? Is it or terrorism? Then the third step is to develop or ascertain what your military resources are, what your economic resources are, and how exactly would they be employed to achieve the security goals that you talked about in the first position. So every country does this. Every country, regardless of size, has specific threats that they need to take care of. Mexico has organized crime. I assume if Syria was serious about what they're trying to do, that terrorism would be one part of its national its grand strategy is to neutralize terrorism. But if they were serious about doing that, then maybe they would have the right partners. Like Iran would not be a partner, the major partner. So for the United States, its security goals right now is to prevent its ultimate collapse into into a middle power or into a weaker country. So I would say that's the primary motivation of the United States, is to avoid this collapse. It was once the largest hegemon. It was the greatest hegemon the world has ever seen, and now it's struggling to balance against China, Russia, and Iran at the same time. So the United States has to figure out what exactly is its goal. Is it one, to preserve its status as a hegemon, or is it two, to defend its system, so its hegemonic system? So you can't preserve your power and preserve your hegemony. That's what I'm trying to say. As a hegemony, you have to fund the system. You have to fund the defense of your political system. So when Russia invades Ukraine, the United States should be able to protect Ukraine and the international status quo. If Russia invades Ukraine, Russia is undermining the American hegemony. Now, the United States can get involved in Ukraine. It can go out and launch an attack in Russia, but is that going to lead to it getting bogged down in another conflict that it probably won't be able to win? Why do I say that? Who's going to win? Is it Russia, that's its near abroad. Ukraine is Russia's near abroad, and they see that the NATO enlargement and Ukraine's behavior is a danger to Russia. So Ukraine moving closer to NATO, Ukraine moving closer to the European Union, that is seen as a threat to Russia. That's your basic realist Mearsheimer argument. If that is the case, if Russia is getting involved in Ukraine for its own security, and the United States gets involved, is Ukraine absolutely vital to America's national interests? I would say no, it's not, because Ukraine is far away. They're not part of NATO. Ukraine is not part of NATO. Like, what is at stake here? I don't think it's enough for the United States to actually employ the resources necessary to see final victory. I have my doubts. So the United States grand strategy, according to I guess a realist, would say that it is defending its national security, its power, and trying to neutralize threats to its power and to its security. So I think that from a realist perspective. But from a liberal perspective, you might argue that America's grand strategy is to defend its liberal hegemony, so defending their status quo, the status quo of the international order. That's the question. Like, what exactly is the aim of the United States in the long run? What are the priorities? That is what grand strategy is all about, trying to figure out the priorities of the country, the security goals, and then figuring out ways to employ the resources necessary to defend the United States, to defend the international order in the best way possible, right? So it goes beyond simple questioning of what the goals are, the national security goals. It's grand, it's big, it's what the United States needs to do to survive. So it's deciding the goals, but it's also trying to figure out how to achieve those goals, right? So that's the The grand strategy is concerned about harnessing all of the country's political resources, military resources, economic resources to advance the national interest. To remember, recall that national interests are determined in terms of power and power position. Now, national interests can also be determined by prestige. So, great powers like the United States, China, and Russia, they see themselves as great. So, what is it? What does it mean to be great? It means not just to do great things, but to be recognized as great, right? It's very important. This recognition of greatness is very it's integral. It's the cornerstone, right? And what is a good definition of prestige? It's a state's reputation for having power and to be recognized for having that power. So it's a struggle for acknowledgement. It's a struggle to be recognized. And prestige behavior is very expensive, right? You want to develop this notion of, yeah, I am one of the world's great players. We saw this in the rise of Germany before World War One, where Germany had the prestige-seeking behavior that Otto von Bismarck was against. He didn't want. Like, you didn't need to have overseas colonies, Wilhelm II, right? You can just be happy being the continental power that you are, making sure you don't rock the boat too much, and eventually you'll be recognized. But who cares if you're recognized or not? But that's the essential difference here. So when we think about it, it's all about having a clear aim. It's a political goal. And that's why Clausewitz is so important to study. Like the Strachan article talks about Clausewitz and how there's a political goal in everything in his book on war. So to understand grand strategy, you have to first understand or determine what the state goals are. And by determining the state's goals, then you can determine how to accomplish those state goals. And we're seeing the United States do this right now with under President Biden, but it has been true throughout history. And that's why I brought in the Kennan argument, the sources of Soviet conduct article that you had to read today. By the way, quick note, the library is the best place to look for articles. So if you're listening to this and you're having trouble finding the reading, do check out the article. Do check out library.ecu.edu for those resources. I think that will be it's very important. So Kennan, right? He writes in 1947. A lot of people are talking a lot of crazy stuff. You know, we have President Truman, not really known for his diplomatic savvy. He's a bit crass. He doesn't know. He's not a finesse guy. Like, I'm a finesse guy. I know how to. You got to be able to talk to people. You got to be able to make sure that, hey, I respect you and I respect your rights and I respect what you're trying to do here. I don't necessarily agree with it, right? That's how you have to do your diplomacy, right? Diplomacy is all about savvy. And that's what Kennan is trying to bring in. Kennan is trying to say, yes, the Soviet Union is expansionist. He was writing in 1947. So this is like one of the highest points in the Cold War. And so he was trying to figure out how best can we, as the United States, calm down the Soviet Union. And he acknowledges in the article, if you read it, he acknowledges that yes, the Soviet Union is expansionist and they have expansive tendencies as socialist countries and, let's be frank here, capitalist countries tend to do. However, there needs to be a strategy that doesn't directly challenge the Soviet Union, but rather acknowledges the Soviet Union's drive to be great and doesn't do anything to undermine or leave a way out for the Soviet Union and the Soviet leadership to save face. Now, saving face is very important, right? You don't want to embarrass your enemy. The last thing you want to do is embarrass your enemy. I find that people like to, as the kids say, rustle the jimmies. But this is not good. This is not a good way of doing things. You as if you follow Kennan's containment strategy, you have to realize that your options must acknowledge Soviet greatness. So in today's world, I advise, rather than humiliating an enemy, whether it be Putin's Russia or Premier Xi Jinping's China, or any country for that matter, you have to be able to give them a way out. Don't humiliate them. Give them a way out and give them a chance to save face. You have to be able to allow your enemy that opportunity to save face. So Kennan's idea of containment is about it's about a Fabian strategy. So you don't be aggressive toward your enemy, but you try to hit at their weaknesses. And indeed, this Soviet power, just like Russia and China today, their economic systems have the seeds of their own disaster, the seeds of their own decay. Capitalism has their seeds of their own decay as well. But Kennan's observation is Kennan's grand strategy is to ensure a few things. The first thing is you have to set the example. You have to be that shining city on a hill. You have to look good. Like Kennan advised that the United States their reputation has to be stellar, because the Soviet Union are going to be doing terrible things, right? Because they're authoritarian. And authoritarian governments basically crush human freedom, right? Like any socialist government, it crushes human individuality, human freedom. Just go to, when you look at China, what's going on in China with the Uyghur internment camps there, the cultural genocide, and possibly the potential for an actual physical Holocaust. One has to remember that the United States cannot be held or do the same thing. So the first thing that Kennan advises is you have to be the good example. You have to be that shining city on the hill, because you need to present a proper alternative to the Soviet system. That's the first thing. And in doing so, the second thing, the idea of containment. So containment is a very simple thing. It's just the idea that you do not allow for further Soviet expansion. Right? So you are trying to contain the expansionary policies of the Soviet Union, right? The second thing that you have to do is that you have to hit at the weaknesses. And of course, the weakness in the Soviet system is the very economic system of the Soviet Union. Believe it or not, I closed the article, so I'm just going to try to pull that up here. I'm not a very good editor, so just bear with me. I don't edit my videos because I don't know how to. So this is gonna maybe take a bit of time here. All right. So you have to be tough with the Soviets. He doesn't say to be soft. He says that you have to be able to present a united, strong front against the Soviets, but also acknowledge that they're seeking prestige. So you have to walk a very fine line here, right? You can't just like humiliate them. So that's the whole point. And the crux of the argument here for Kennan is that the United States has to play a very strong, has to present a very strong front against the Soviet Union, but it has to realize that communism is indeed unsustainable. Communism is unsustainable, and so you just have to wait it out. It might take a while, but capitalism is vibrant. I'm going to come to the capitalism part. It's a very vibrant thing, so it's going to grow and grow, and socialism tends to stagnate over time. And so the more shortages, the more difficult it becomes, but the more economically advanced that the United States becomes, the better off the United States will look reputationally, and then more people would want to join the United States and the United States system. So Kennan, again, he talks about firm and vigilant containment of Russia. So what that means is you have to be able to, you have to ensure that they do not expand any further than they already have in Eastern Europe. And the weaknesses of the Soviet system is its economic system. And just from capitalism doing what it does best, producing innovation, highly technological goods, improving the standard of living for people, that is going to be basically a shining city on a hill. More people would want to gravitate toward that, and the United States might want to help certain countries develop their infrastructure, like the Marshall Plan after the Cold War. The United States helped the countries of Western Europe, the democracies, to grow and to be part of the capitalist world and improve standard of living. All this helps with balancing against the Soviet Union. And by doing so, you show to the world that the Soviet way is not the right way. And again, so coming back to the grand strategy aspect of it, containment. Kennan's ideas in containment: one, determine the security goals of the United States, and two, they show or suggest ways in which the military power of the United States can be used and the economic power of the United States can be used toward that specific goal. And what I love about Kennan is that he says this is not going to be overnight thing. It's going to take a long time, and we have to remain disciplined, we have to be firm, and we have to be vigilant, because this is going to be a long one, right? That's the whole gist of Kennan's work. And I like it. I like grand strategy because it's practical, it's pragmatic. I think regime change overall, like another grand strategy, would be to create democracies out of countries who are authoritarian. And so like that's called neoconservatism. That's a very destructive ideology. I don't quite like it. It's too messy. I don't agree with it. You know, the Paul Wolfowitzes, the Rumsfelds, the W. Bushes, all of this stuff is very, very expensive, and I don't like it. People like it because it presents like a strong image of the United States, but it's very sloppy and it's very destructive, and I think it hurts the United States in the long run. So these fellas, talking about regime change, it's not a good idea. I'm trying to remember this one fellow's uh, name. His ideas are just so bad. I can't remember his name, but he has a hat. He's like Washington Post. I can't remember. Anyway, let me see. Hold on. Max Boot. So Max Boot, he talks about perpetual warfare. So the United States should be ever ready and ever present to export Pax Americana, which is American domination, the American peace. That's what Pax means. So this is what he wrote, and I believe he wrote this in 2019. And the article is called "Why Winning and Losing Are Irrelevant in Syria and Afghanistan." So we shouldn't be worried about whether or not we win or lose. He says, let me just get the actual article. So the article is called, again, "Why Winning and Losing Are Irrelevant in Syria and Afghanistan." So this is bad grand strategy, right? This is an example of, let me not say bad, destructive, right? Destructive to American reputation, destructive to American lives, American power. So Max Boot argues that Donald Trump's pulling out of Syria and Afghanistan are not a good idea. He says that the United States needs to do away with a war mindset and focus on remaining present in these countries forever. And he says that we need to start, this is a quote, "We need to think of these deployments in much the same way we thought of our Indian wars." I'm assuming he means the Native Americans, war with the Native Americans, which lasted roughly 300 years. Or as the British thought about their deployment in the Northwest frontiers, which lasted 100 years. U.S. troops are not undertaking a conventional combat assignment. They are policing the frontiers of the Pax Americana. Just as the police aren't trying to eliminate crime, so troops are not trying to eliminate terrorism, but instead to keep it below a critical threshold that threatens the United States and our allies. So what he's saying here is, hey, we're going to do this forever. There's no aim here except to police. This is grand strategy. And so he argues that the U.S. public is not opposed to this perpetual deployment. That as long as American troops have limited casualties, that they can stay there forever. Now, I'm not a big fan of this because the aim, again, if we want to think about grand strategy, if you want to think about it seriously, we're going to figure out what exactly are we doing. We're trying to protect American interests. Is this the best way to deploy American power and resources? Yes or no? Is perpetual deployment a good idea in terms of protecting American interests? Is it good American grand strategy? I would say no. You might say yes. I don't think this is a very smart way to use your resources, especially because once that mission creep kicks in, once one thing leads to another, like in Vietnam, and you go from 1,000 advisors to how many thousands of people, American soldiers dead, and Laos and Cambodia also invaded or pulled in. Is it Laos and Cambodia? Laos and the other country. I don't think it's very wise. But again, just to recap here, very, very important to recap. Grand strategy is all about the big picture. It's about determining your security goals. It is about determining how to achieve those security goals and trying to preserve what you already have. If you have any questions, let me know. Thank you very much for your attention.